Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'm going to be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we are talking about being on the embodied spiritual path, and what does that actually mean? So what is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We're attempting to sort that out for ourselves here on the show. And in today's episode, we are talking about groundlessness in our personal lives and in the global collective these days. Things are feeling quite a lot like there isn't much solid, predictable ground to stand on. And we are so wired to want that stability, to have something that is bedrock, something constant in our lives. However, as Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche once said, quote, "The bad news is you're falling through the air, nothing to hang on to, no parachute. The good news is there's no ground." That may or may not feel like good news. We tackle the good news and the bad news in the midst of our own, at least in my case right now, messy processes with groundlessness. If you're enjoying the show, we would be very thrilled if you could leave a review for us on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe to get updates on upcoming events that we might have running in the future. And one last note, those of you who are new to the show, heads up, we have potty mouths, so you might want to wear headphones if you're hanging out with children's. Okay, here we go. Okay, everyone, this is Brooke talking. And so what Vanessa and I always do when we record an episode is we have a chance to get on Skype first, and we always have like a little mini life catch up. How are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And then we talk about what we're planning on talking about. So we had planned to talk about boundaries, which we'll do at some point. But our personal life catch up was about the very intense sensation, both in our personal lives, but for sure in the global collective sense of just utter groundlessness, you know, of really wanting a little time out to catch our breath and not being delivered that even remotely. So since that was a very clear theme, we decided we would actually run with that. And that's what's more juicy and available and real for us right now. Not that boundaries aren't always a hot topic for us too.
That is always front and center of my mind.
Yeah, there's always something to say about boundaries. But yeah, so this idea of groundlessness and the feeling that there's nothing solid or stable to stand on, or the things that always had been solid and stable that you could have as bedrock, and maybe bedrock in a sense that you never even thought about them, like, I don't know, democracy. Suddenly seem to be just going away. It's like, oh, really kind of took that for granted. That just felt like ground I could stand on all the time. Now I can't stand on that ground. So it's an inflamed time in the world for all of us. And yeah, we'll see where we go with that one, Vanessa.
Gosh, there's so many different places we can go. And, you know, like I was saying to you before, Brooke, it does feel to me like when we're in these kinds of groundless times, and I'm in a groundless time personally, which I'll share a little bit more about, but collectively, you know, it's not just about what's happening in the U.S. and our politics. That is a piece of it. It's just what's been happening in the world. You know, all of these different current events and bombings and killings. And I don't know, all of these different things keep coming. And to me, groundlessness, I always experience it as like when I was a little kid and I used to go swimming in the Atlantic Ocean, and like a wave would hit me and I'd kind of go under and I'd be spinning, and I'm like, all right, fine. And I get up and I'm like, oh, thank God. And then all of a sudden another wave would come, like before you even had a chance.
And you didn't know which way was up anymore.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, and sometimes I don't know how this used to happen, but I feel like it could be like 4 or 5 waves or just
and you're getting the sand burn on your skin, but you still don't know where's down and where is up.
Exactly. And you're like, oh, give me a fucking minute. Like, would you? so I can like stand on the sand and then I'll figure it all out, right? And I get that feeling a lot in life where I guess when things are happening, especially personally, one thing creates a chain of events, right? So let's say, for example, I get mold sick. Well, when I get sick from mold, that created a sequence of events. Like I have to sell my houses, I have to move, I have to pack, I have to, go to a doctor, right? So in our personal life, I think it's not uncommon that one thing triggers a sequence of waves.
Mm-hmm.
And you just wish like you could slow life down for a second so you can catch your breath and then find your true north and then deal with the next thing and then catch your breath and find your true north. And it really doesn't work that way, of course. And we see right now that it's also not working that way in the collective. Like, I don't think that you and I are alone in feeling like 2016 going into 2017 now. It's just this, it's almost like rapidly accelerating movement of like another wave and another wave and another wave. At the very least, for those of us that are kind of consciously inclined, I'm not sure if everybody feels the same way, but I do think there's a large majority of people that must be feeling like us, like the hits just don't stop coming.
Yeah. And, I think that, all right, so we are clearly not delighted about a Trump presidency. It's been massively painful for me. I have never had an experience in my life before, ever, good or bad, where I felt quite this sense that I must be in a dream. Like I keep waking up every day and I'm like, yes. I'm sorry, Donald Trump is the president? And like we all have those with good and bad things, like new parent or sudden loss of a loved one. And you're like, this must be a dream. But this feels like really intensely that way. So anyway, clearly we're not fans. And probably a lot of people listening are also not fans. However, for those of you who voted for him or who are fans, I think it's inflaming on both sides. I mean, obviously the division between the sides is at least being broadcast as happening and intensifying. Although I've had some lovely time with Trump supporters in the last couple of weeks in a way where we just didn't hate on each other and had normal lives and interactions. But it's like I watched in my town anyway, the people who are thrilled that he's the president, and they're inflamed too. It's a different thing, but it's still this like pressurized feeling, like the person who drives around in the giant truck flying a Trump Pence flag off of it, for example, around my house. It's all happening, or the people who are like covering the bridges over the highway with American flags, like they're inflamed too. So there's this collective pressure chamber. And so I was talking with one of my very dear friends today, and she was saying, I feel like now we all have our lives, like stuff goes on in our personal lives the same way it always has, ups and downs, goods and bads. And then we have this other shitty layer on top where we have to deal with the fact that things globally are just crazy precarious and like out of control. And I think that's true for everyone on both sides. And what that means, since we aren't islands, is that we're all feeling it very, very, very intensely right now. We're all feeling very pressurized. I keep using that word, but that's the way it feels to me in my body, and agitated. So, of course, I always think of the Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche quote when I'm in my groundless place, which it does not look like anytime soon we're going to have any kind of ground to stand on, although future tense is only figment of my imagination, so who knows what will happen. So he says the bad news is there is no ground. No, wait, the bad news is you are falling through space. The good news is there is no ground. So it's like, it's perfectly him where you're like, that all sounds kind of like bad news. But for me, I'm going through this period right now where I'm having these big, spacious, peaceful moments, even in the midst of the groundlessness, and these very painful, collapsed, identified, painful moments. And I just keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But when I can access the falling through space and understanding that there just is no ground, there's nothing I'm going to slam into. And I mean this in terms of like physically how I feel, but also experientially the way I understand how much the stories are running my show about the past and the future, which are just imagination. It really helps me to get to this place where it has this skydiving quality, the images of the skydivers who haven't pulled their parachutes yet. And they just look like they're having a good time. You know, there's nothing to slam into. There's nothing to grab onto. You're just free falling. In their case, there is a ground and they need a parachute. But in the spiritual sense, there is this idea of groundlessness.
I guess we're so wired to kind of want stability and rest, right? It's like, I think this might be part of the human conditioning that led Buddha to talk about like the causes of suffering. I think this is one of them. It's like that desire that we have to make things predictable that we talked about like in the ego episode and, you know, other episodes. So the whole concept of ground, right, is I want something stable that I can rest on. I want something that is like consistent and that is bedrock in my life, right? And I imagine that all of us humans do that. We want to know what to expect a little bit. We want to know what to predict a little bit. And so, you know, when you listen to the Buddhist talks, this is just for all of you to have a little more concept that Brooke and I probably have in the back of our minds as we talk. They'll share about there's absolute and relative. So there is no absolute ground. That's emptiness, right? That's the whole thing about emptiness. There is no ground. There is nothing stable and consistent, predictable that you can rest your little psyche in to say everything is just going to be okay. It's like this.
Right.
Right. So there's no absolute ground. However, there is relative ground in this world of form, or at the very least, we can say we try to create relative ground. So we create our home and our careers and our family units. And there's this sense that in this relative world of form, I can rest in this. And to some degree you can, Brooke, right? Like you can rest in the fact that as long as August is here, he will probably love you. It's like something you rest in, you know. We can rest in the fact that like, well, at least we would have been able to rest in the fact that America is a pretty safe place to be.
Yeah, we used to rest in that.
We used to rest in
that. Or
that.
that the government worked, you know, for us, for example.
For us, for all the people. So we would rest in these things. And I guess that's what we're looking for, you know, is this ability to kind of put life in a certain container in which we can rest and feel like we can find some stability within ourselves by proxy of creating that stability within our ecosystem. So in times like this, like in my life, okay, got sick, have to sell my houses, can't go back to Florida, had to move, you know, new place, new people, new career opportunities. Really nothing looks very familiar. And the thought process is I need to slow it down so I can have the time to anchor myself, get my grounding, take a breath, and then I can see what's what. And it seems instead that what life asks from us is to like find stillness in the movement. Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting thing. And I think, you know, as we said, that's my personal experience at this very moment. But it's pretty much a collective experience, A, with the turbulence, and B, I kind of guess on some level we're all always going through this and dealing with shifting tides.
Yeah. And, you know, I was talking with somebody last night who's a psychotherapist for many years. And so she knows this quite well, as do I. And we were saying, you know, like we are collectively in what feels like a downward spiral towards a kind of a rock bottom, you know? And what we know about rock bottom is that it's often, but not always, but often catalytic for change. You know, it's like you hit bottom and there's clarity can rush in. Not always, but it can. You have a choice to see it and make changes in your personal life. So collectively, we have that going on too, it would seem. And I just want to, all right, so a few things. First of all, the last thing I want to do is get spiritual bypassy. Like, hooray, silver lining, we're all going to bottom out, and then we're going to know that,
and the global picture will finally be conscious.
It'll finally,
and we'll all be utopian.
And, it's like, I'm sure people said that about Hitler, quite frankly, in World War II. Like, hey, can't get worse than this. Now we're really going to have world peace. Like, well, guess what? That didn't happen. So I'm not trying to like silver lining anything or to like, I can't tell you how pleasurable it would feel to just grab the brass ring of a spiritual bypass on this, but I'm not able to believe that it's true. So I'm not trying to do the like, hey guys, bad news is such good news. But on the other hand, at the very least, like, so we're going to be feeling pain right now for those of us who are like, shocked by all the waves of news on the collective. And then of course, this can apply to our personal lives and all the waves that come there too. But it is an invitation, at least. Groundlessness is an invitation to investigate, well, what did I think was ground in the first place? What was I making assumptions about? What was I telling stories about? And then if it turns out that that's not true, or the pain in me is telling me that it's not true, what now? There is something beyond just agony, I guess, is like the invitation that I want to make to people, which is not a bypass or a silver lining or like, hey, now we're going to bottom out and collectively get our act together. But there are always very potent seeds in these things, and they're individual as well as collective. Like the different ways that this is pushing on all of us is going to give all of us different opportunities. I feel like I'm not being super articulate, but it's because I'm thinking about, like, for me, one of the things that's been very helpful in the last few days is, I was saying to you before, like, I'm listening to Byron Katie on a loop. Like, I'm listening to her podcast where it's just these short little snippets of her doing the work with people not about this, although she did recently do a newsletter where she did the work with 2 people on Donald Trump, but just all the stuff that comes up in a human life. Somebody's partner died, fell off a mountain and died while hiking. Somebody's mother abandoned them when they were 5 years old and now is a crazy person who's trying to get in touch with their children. Like really painful stuff. And she has such clarity of getting people to the stories that they were believing were true. And then, ground gets ripped out from under them. And then you have to question, well, is that true? Is that story I'm believing true? And what happens when people go through this process is they get to genuine relief. They get to these moments of like, like new fresh space opens up. And like, maybe this suffering I've been feeling, these ideas that have been causing me to feel so much emotional pain, can be met in a new way where I can actually see things quite differently. And so the stories, I think, are so important to get to. Like, the more we can ask if something is true, the more we see that we're always talking past, future, past, future, past, future. None of which is happening right now. Mm-hmm. I'm totally not being articulate because it's a felt experience thing that I'm going through currently. So it's like not good language about it.
I feel you're being articulate, although maybe I'm just making up what I think you're saying. To me, you're being articulate. I just think you're trying to describe many layers of a nuanced picture, and I do think that there's always opportunity, right? Because where there's pain, where there's frustration, where there's anger or sadness, there is a stuckness. There is an inhibition in our system, right? Because it is so individual. Why isn't everyone feeling exactly the same thing and thinking exactly the same thing right now? It's because it's revealing different things to us, just like the way when I told you, I don't know, several episodes ago, I was talking about how I was talking to Kieran, one of our mentors, and I was so upset about NALED being sprayed in Miami for Zika.
Right.
And I was like, how could they ruin the ecosystem like this? And I was so put out. And Kieran was like, okay, so what's happening in your ecosystem? Why is this so relevant to you? Right? What is this mirroring? And in fact, after going to see this doctor in Dallas, he thinks that NALED probably was one of the major things that threw me over the edge.
Huh.
So in fact, it was very relevant to me. But beyond that, it was really about my ecosystem and what was out of balance. And so, a lot of people in Miami were upset about that. But my experience was personal and it was individual. And I could feel by what it was pressing into.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see by what thoughts were arising where I'm still stuck, where I'm inhibited, what's true for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on that level, of course, when it feels like the ground is pulled out from under us and we're swimming in this kind of space and we're dealing with these different feelings arising, there is always opportunity to see, oh, well, as you said before, this is what I expected. I didn't realize. I mean, ground is so tricky, isn't it? Because we find ground in a lot of things. We find ground in our personas, like we talked about in the ego, episode. Like we find ground by being us predictable. We find ground in the idea that I'm always going to be happy, or I'm always going to be content, or I'm always going to be anxious. Like we find ground in our emotions. We find ground in thinking a certain way.
Yeah.
Right? We find ground in people, which is a really slippery slope. Like that is some dangerous shit, where it's like, I can only feel steady when. So ground is like really slippery for all of us to start to look at, like, where am I placing my expectations on how life is supposed to look, on how I'm supposed to be in order for me to feel okay. I mean, stable is probably the more appropriate word, but I think for many of us, it's like, I can be okay as long as.
Right.
And like, this is okay for me. And this makes life acceptable. But when I'm like dealing with Trump wanting to sell the national parks or something, it's like the ground got ripped away from me. Or like if you lost a relationship and the ground gets ripped away from you. Now, there is an opportunity beyond what we just said, beyond the discourse we can have with our narratives. And this is the part that you didn't want to be silver lining about. But movement is movement.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And when something moves, you don't know which direction. I keep thinking about water, right? Like, and if I was to like open a dam, like it's going to move, but I don't know which way it's going to move. It can go left. It can go right. It can go forward. So on that note, even on an energetic level, all of these events are creating movement. That's for shit sure. That we can see.
Yeah.
And maybe we're lucky and the movement moves some way that is, for the higher good.
Well, it is. It just is. However, that doesn't mean it's going to be pleasurable or pleasant or that our species will survive. You know what I mean? Like, it's for sure for the higher good, and we might all die. Both are true.
Well, it's official. I can't have children.
But that's the truth of it, I need that little horn sound, the wah, 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 Debbie Downer. I need it. I need to own it.
We'll post it.
But anyway, so I think of two Byron Katie quotes that help me a lot. And it's like, in terms of, is the movement going to be beneficial? And one is about parenting. If this were your child's path to God, would you take it away from them? I think I've said that on a show a few times because it's one of my parenting mantras when I'm worried, about a bully at school or whatever. It's like, if this were your child's path to God, would you take it away from them? No. So I've been swapping it out for country. If this were your country's path to God, would you take it away from them? No. And her other one, which I've found very helpful, is who needs God when we have your opinion? And it's like, there is a higher intelligence than me, than you, than any of us running this show. I understand not everyone agrees with me there, but if you're listening to this show, you probably do. So like we all do our own piece from our own perspective. Like there is
like, what if it's not intelligent? What if it's just literally a mirroring? Like,
well, yeah, I think there's some truth to that, which is why we have to, in my opinion, find ways to genuinely alchemize our own pain bodies, not put on a happy face, not spiritually bypass, oh, it's all for the higher good, so whatevs. And not shapeshift and identify around them in a way where we make them denser. You know, the more we can lean into this, you know, suffering is an opportunity. And I remember saying to Kieran once, because one of my things that I get to really quickly that really is very painful for me is just like, what the fuck? Why? Why do we suffer so much? This is so much agony. There just can't be intelligence behind this much suffering. It's so painful. Fuck this. I want out. Where's the exit door? I've been looking for the exit door my whole life and probably every life.
Me too. That's why we're besties.
I know. I'm like, get me out of here. And so I was saying that to Kieran, and she said to me, okay, well, what has suffering been for you in your life? And I'm like, well, you know, when I think about all the suffering that I've been through, it's been totally alchemical. Like it's been the key ingredient for me to actually see things from a much clearer, more expansive, more loving consciousness. And she's like, okay. It's like, well, that's probably true for the collective too. You know, I don't know. I don't actually know, but I know that for me, in my experience, that's true. And there was always a choice, you know, because there's always free will. There was always a choice to identify with my suffering and just keep saying yes and shoveling more in. And there are plenty of moments in my life where I did do that. And then there was also within that suffering, plenty of opportunities to look at it, question it, sit with it, and it does transform eventually.
This could be a total non sequitur, but I'm going to just
bring
non sequitur away, perhaps. You know, I had written to you when I'm sitting in this clinic. So I've been at this clinic for like 3 weeks getting tested and treated for this health condition. And I get these IVs and they are glorious because they have magnesium in them and B vitamins, and you just feel super chill. So I'm getting this IV done and I'm in this really chill state. And sometimes when I get in a chill state, I will get visuals. That's just like one of the beautiful things that arises for me. So I'm in this really chill state, and much to my good fortune, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche comes to visit me. And you all should know he does that from time to time. It is a rare thing, but he does do it. And he always offers delightful, humorous, and short to the point wisdom when he does. Usually it's been on meditation retreat, but this was lucky. So I'm just laying there and he comes to me and he says to me, you know, Vanessa, this isn't so special. This is just life. It's just life. And I don't know how to really describe like what that exactly means to me, but I realized like whether you're sick, whether you're going through a divorce, whether, you know, you're politically inflamed and pro or against, whatever the case may be, whatever you're going through in your life, you know, these times of suffering, quote unquote, we try to make them into this really special event, like this big thing that's happening. Like, yeah, we even phase it in our minds, right? Like the time I was suffering, and then I'll get to the time where I'm not suffering, or, you know, like I can't wait to get out of the clinic to get back to normal life. Like that was kind of my thought, you know, or we'll be like, oh, I can't wait till this Trump shit comes down so I can get back to like normal Facebook.
So we can just, post cute pictures of our vacation again. Jesus.
Holy cow. I actually can't wait for that. I cannot wait.
I think you are not alone.
Business as usual. But, you know, like that's what we do. We kind of like segment these things in our experience as like, this isn't normal and I want to get back to ground, right? And what he said to me is like, this is life. This this right here.
Yeah.
You know, and the way it's like being in the ocean, like the waves are going to come and they're going to go. And really the only problem ever was I expected life to be a certain way.
Yeah.
I expect life to be not sick, not in a clinic sitting for, from 9 to 5. And otherwise, what was the problem? I was sitting there. There were beautiful people around me. I got to learn. I laughed a lot. I got to understand more about myself. I saw where I was stuck more, what's the problem?
Yeah. And that's what I was trying to get at very clumsily about the past, future. Suffering only exists in the past and the future. That's a big statement. So I'm going to break it on down.
Break it on down.
Based on what I'm doing in my own practice, like a crazy rabid dog right now, like all day long, I'm doing this because it's the closest thing I've got to an exit door, bitches. Okay. Don't take away one exit door. Okay. So what you're talking about is so perfect because as you're sitting there in the clinic, what's actually happening is you feel relaxed. You're having these moments of intimacy with other people who you never would have met before, a little shared talking or just even a look across the room. You're comfortable. You're safe. You're working with doctors. You try, whatever. Like what's happening is you're sitting in that chair in that moment with those people feeling that way. But the suffering is past. You have stories about, I remember when I was a burden before, or I remember how sick I felt at the end of living in Miami or whatever. And then future, and then you toggle it right to future, which is, I don't know if I'm ever going to be well. I hope that I'm not always the person who's always sick and people are going to treat me like blah, 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 blah. And I'll never be able to live in a house that I don't test it.
Why do I have to be a sensei?
Right. So it's just past, future. And that's where all the suffering lives. So when I say something like suffering only exists in the past or the future, what I have been doing, and then I'm like, no, but that can't be true because what if? And I'm like, instantly I'm in the future. And I'm like, okay, and then I'll go to like, say, Auschwitz in my mind. That never should have happened. And I'm like, okay, that's in the past. Past, future. And so what I've been doing is going into the past about some of my very, very, very painful moments as I was living them and kind of re-inhabiting them and going, was suffering really happening in that moment? Like I'm talking terrible stuff. And what I notice is that something unpleasant was happening from the outside looking in, like if you're watching a movie of it, right? Inside of myself in that moment, I was telling stories about the past or the future that allowed it to happen. I'm not doing blame the victim stuff. What I'm saying is there was clarity even in that moment that could have allowed me to find a safer space, and even the actual thing, whatever the thing was that was super unpleasant, if I re-inhabit myself, I can see that the suffering was mostly tied up in the past and the future and not actually what was happening in the present moment. So I'm going way out on a limb.
Whoa, yes.
And I understand this is going to be confusing to a lot of people because this is like, it's confusing. It's confusing to our culture. It's confusing to anyone who's ego identified, which is 99% of us and me, but I'm dropping a shit ton of layers lately, I'll tell you what. And this is a piece of it where I'm like, oh my God, it's just this amazing quality of surrender, which feels exactly like discovering that groundlessness is okay. Like it's not a problem.
Okay.
Maybe we'll edit that all out.
No, we likely won't because that's too much work. No, it's just a mouthful. And I think that the essence of the message about past, future, you got across, and it's very important. I think where probably some clarification could come through is like the part where you're recognizing like, okay, I have choice, right? And you're in this place of some things happening that's uncomfortable and unpleasant, but you're recognizing you have choice. What does that mean for you? In other words, how does that change things? The fact that you're now looking back and re-experiencing it and seeing that.
Because I'm discovering that right now it's true that my suffering is only past or future, right? So let's say my suffering is, a psychopath is running our country, the most powerful nation in the world, many would argue. And like, let's say I go all the way to the end of that. I'm like, this is the end of the human experiment. We're all going to die. There's this completely unhinged person who's going to, whatever, kill us all, whether slowly
Nuclear
with
war,
climate change or quickly with nuclear war.
Yeah.
That's not happening right now. Mm-hmm. But as soon as I say, hey, Brooke, that's not happening right now, my thinking mind goes, but it might. Mm-hmm. You got to be vigilant. And so is that true? Because what I realize is that like all it makes me feel is terror, and it's not happening. And when I don't believe the thought, it turns out I'm actually not a completely passive person. Like, I connected with a woman last night who's putting together, a group of women locally so that we can get together once a week and just take one small action together. Peaceful, loving, sane, people I like, easy. Just came across my lap. It didn't require me being terrified. In fact, I probably wouldn't be able to show up and do those things if I were terrified. So anyway, what I discover is that the story that I'm telling about, except the really bad things are really bad in the moment. When I investigate that, I don't find that that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I mean, and that's something that y'all will just have to take and chew on, and see in your life, because you can't know that until you know that.
Yeah, that is not a layer that cognitive thing on yourself and feel compressed and shame-based and angry and suppressed. All of those feelings are signs that you're just layering on a thought structure on top of what's already painful. So don't do that. And I feel like a smaller bite might just be when we suffer, when we feel this groundlessness, and then we suffer, ask yourself the question, what is the story I'm telling about the suffering? So that slows you down. It's just a meditative inquiry. And then notice, is it a past-based or a future-based thought, or does it continually toggle? Which I find oftentimes you just keep boop, 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 and nothing's happening right here. It's just a way to meditate through your day. You don't have to believe all kinds of ideas about there is no such thing as suffering really ever. You don't have to go that far out. It can just be, like how much time do I spend just toggling between past, future? Because it's surprising shit.
Oh, well, it is like never ending. That was very clear, Brooke. And it makes me think about expectations again. Last week, I think it was, we posted something about Ram Dass, and he was saying, like, if you're suffering, it's because you have expectations. So maybe that's why it's sticking in my head. But, I'm thinking about, there was this time my mom had gotten skin cancer. It was a pretty bad kind. It wound up, she got really lucky and she had caught it right at the beginning, but most people wouldn't. And it's really, really like a bad scenario. But I remember her saying something like, why me? And that like common thought that we can have, like, why me? Why is this happening to me? That's that kind of victim mentality that you were kind of getting at. And it's like, the way I saw it was like, well, why not you? Right? Like, this is something that's happening to the humans,
Yeah, people get skin cancer.
People get skin cancer. People get sick, right? So I think it really is like our expectations even about the world, right? Like, I think people in our tribe, right? Like the conscious thinkers, the seekers, the sensees, I do think we have some expectations about how the world was supposed to be. I feel like in the US over this last, 6 months or so as Donald Trump, took presidency, it was like, oh no, the world is not supposed to be racist still.
Right. Or insane or misogynistic.
Yeah, or misogynistic.
Whatever flavor you want to pick.
Ignorant or angry. It was
hateful.
Like, I felt like everybody had a bubble pop. Like they were shocked. Like, oh no.
And you can't look at any part of human history and discover that it has always been true.
I know.
There's been ignorance and hatred and anger and division and always.
Well, and plus it's like
I need my Debbie Downer sound again.
Plus it's like, look around. you maybe just saw that racism was happening to the extent it was happening.
Yeah.
But it was happening. It was happening. You had a blinder on because you expected the world to be different because you think differently.
Right.
Or you feel differently, or you want to believe in people differently. You don't want to rest in the ground of the world of recognizing that most people are ignorant and creating their own suffering, right?
Right.
So we have these expectations, like someone like Donald Trump can't win. Not in my world.
Right.
Not my worldview. And if so, then it means something like really terrible is happening. But it's like, or is this just a movement? Is it just a movement of energy created by another movement of energy? And so I do think that ground really is us trying to set up expectations that make the world something that we can live with, or make ourselves something we can live with. I have to be productive. I mean, I had a friend the other day. She's such a beautiful, wonderful human being. And she's like, I feel like such a loser. I didn't exercise today and I didn't see one client. I'm such a loser. And you know how I feel about that.
Yeah,
kind of shit.
I know. Yeah, I do.
I'm like, fucking chillax, like enjoy. But that means that for her ground that she is artificially constructing is I am okay and everything is okay as long as I am productive.
Yep.
Right? As long as I achieve, as long as I exercise, as long as I'm getting farther, whatever the version of it is. We all have that. Everything is okay and I am okay as long as I'm happy, as long as people around me are kind, as long as the world is not, full of hateful people, then I am okay, then everything is okay. And it's like artificial ground after artificial ground after artificial ground. I mean, I keep wanting to talk about spiritual materialism as we're going through this talk.
Yep.
But I feel like that's worthy of its own episode. But, for those of you, just since we're teasing it, it's like Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche wrote about spiritual materialism, which really is us clinging to and building these structures and reference points.
Yeah.
Everything's okay as long as everyone sees me as a good person. Right. And I'm a good person as long as I do,
Right.
And we keep doing that more and more. Ground, structure, reference points. And the fucked up part is that's all an illusion and it's all bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's what Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was trying to get at with people is like, you're free falling anyway, and there is no ground. Guess what?
Yeah.
And you're feeling anxiety, or you're feeling like you're not real, or you're feeling false, or you're wanting an exit strategy because you know that the ground that you are creating is a fucking illusion.
Yeah. And you're grabbing so hard onto the air. You're shaking, you're grabbing so hard,
And he's like, there is no good story I can tell you. I was just about to be as Debbie Downer. He's like, yes, you're going to die.
Right. Well, we are. It's fucking fine. It's how it goes.
Not real, and nothing is real, and there's nothing you can cling to.
Yeah. So lest you all feel like we're just dumping in your lap that yes, it does all suck. Yes, humanity has always been terrible. So deal with it.
And you're dying.
I would like to say, okay, so the movement of trying to create ground is to go out, away from yourself, your thoughts. Your thoughts go out. How can I fix it? How can I make ground, right? Try to notice that movement out, away from yourself into the I can make the world be the way I want it to be, and just come back to yourself. Make it so small that it's like one granular thought. We're all going to die.
Don't get me started again.
And then question, is that true? And what you'll discover is, yes, it is. And what you might find on the other side of that is relief. Like, because you're just not playing tug of war anymore, and you'll have a million granular thoughts that you'll discover, oh my God, that's not true. Like we're all going to go up in a big nuclear bomb. Is that true? Is it happening right now? No. So you're telling yourself a story. You're living in the worst case scenario now, and it's not happening. You're missing your life because of a terrible movie you're playing in your head, and I am too. So this isn't like a shame blame thing. It's an invitation to just make it tiny, make it about one granular thought inside of you, not out there in the world that needs to be fixed. And see if you can just find a little bit of accepting, surrendering into the groundlessness, even for a moment. And I get how it's a painful process. Like, I really do feel like a light switch right now where I'm like, open, close, up, down. And it's an interesting ride. I get it.
Well, okay. I'm so glad you brought it back to something like that, because by the time I was talking about dying, I was laughing so hard I was crying, and I would have totally forgotten. But what had occurred to me to say early on as we were talking, this experience of like, I can't catch my breath. And that's a saying, right? And I think we all relate to a moment where we can't catch our breath. Hello, what is the antidote to that is, to breathe. So I think for myself, when the waves keep coming and this idea of like, I just need a minute, like, can life just give me a minute to catch my breath? And what we're really looking for is some stillness, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, I wish things would just get still enough for me to find myself, for me to reconnect. And the answer really is that the stillness is always there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's there, that when you say go inward beyond just the inquiry, you mean really like inside there is this stillness. That's kind of the quote unquote good news, like that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche even would have offered. It's like, yes, you're free falling and it's groundless. And even in that, there's something true.
Yeah.
And the true is true, and the true is stillness. And that's there. It's like I just worked with a client just now who deals with a lot of generalized anxiety. We go in the body. Where is the anxiety in the body? It's up in her shoulders. Okay. Breathe into it, touch it, but you're just making space. You're not changing anything. Just be with it, touch it. Do that. Now let the anxiety take up space. Like as much space as it wants. Don't do anything about it. Like no resistance. Just see what happens. Let it take up space. She lets it take up space. Okay, tell me, what do you notice? What are you feeling? She goes, well, it's gone. I mean, this is like within 2 minutes. This always happens because energy moves. And okay, great. So what is there? What do you feel? And she goes, I feel still.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, because that's you. We didn't dissect a narrative, which has its time and place, actually. There's a lot of good in actually looking at the narratives. We didn't do anything. We just made space for life.
Yeah.
No expectation, like this anxiety shouldn't be there. No need, no grabby hands. Just, make space for what is, your feelings, for life, for the waves. And as she did, of course, everybody uncovers the same thing. I've done this.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times. Peace, joy, stillness. So that's always available for you. So I think that's our reminder for all of us, for me and you, Brooke, and for everyone listening, for this whole tribe of caring, sensey people, is that no matter what's being stirred in the ecosystem, there's still stillness between the words.
And I will say that like when you're inflamed and your pain body is super active, that will feel like it won't possibly be enough. Like this good news that the stillness is already there. It won't possibly be enough just to take a moment to connect to it. But I challenge you all to go find out for yourselves. Yes. Is that really true? Like the moment of just coming home to yourself, whether through inquiry, meditation, movement, whatever, literally go find the stillness and see. It might be more than enough, a really much bigger gift than we can anticipate when we're in pain.
Challenge accepted.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any of the resources we might have mentioned in our conversation, live, as always, at blissandgrit.com. If you go to the website and scroll down, you're going to see each episode's post, and the resources are within that post. You can also come chat with us on the social media channel of your liking. We are at Instagram and Facebook, and we respond pretty quickly, so it's a good place to talk with us, ask questions, give feedback, that kind of thing. And we're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. If you want to support the show, the biggest help right now would be to write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our Facebook page. And we have a new subscribe form on the website, which you can also sign up at. And that way we'll stay in touch with you if any new events or things are brewing for the community. We really are loving hearing from all of you. The reviews are very heartening. It's sweet to hear how this is actually impacting people's lives. However, if technology isn't your thing, you can also just tell your friends who you think might be into it. Okay, so here is a review on iTunes from Deborah S. in Switzerland. Listening to Bliss and Grit is like drinking water in the middle of a desert. They speak about the real stuff and don't worry if they use the appropriate spiritual lingo or not. They say it just as it is. I've been following every single episode, listening attentively to every sentence, every word. Having been a radio journalist myself, I do know how hard it is to create a show people can actually follow without dropping out. Brooke and Vanessa do a great job, and they are as great with what they do because they speak about things that concern them for real, about what it means to follow some kind of spirituality without leaving life and not see the dark spots. They are as real gets and don't get scared when they have to show their true color. I just love what you do, and I have the feeling we need people who, like you, who keep this stuff grounded, and I keep repeating myself, real, with a little heart. Thank you so much, and it's really sweet to hear that somebody is listening in Switzerland, and I've seen reviews from Israel, and I've seen reviews from the UK, and just seeing people from all over the place is super fun. Okay, we'll be back next week.